but I couldn't connect. Find yourself in this situation one day.
It's called planning.
A lot of the questions that were asked are actually illegal. What's the worst that can happen?
This is Teacher Talk.
Oh, that's a nice title, isn't it?
Welcome back, everybody. This is Teacher Talk, episode 2. Let's get straight into it. So, Kane, where you left us last time, you'd left Vietnam and you'd come back, obviously, for your mother's birthday.
Yeah.
Obviously, set the scene, obviously, what went on when you got back to England.
Of course, after being away for so long, I was excited to get back, of course, but in all honesty, that excitement was it was short-lived.
So why was it short-lived?
You know, because I'd been away for about 7 or 8 months, which I think at that point was the longest I'd ever been away from home. Mm-hmm. And this has been a constant throughout my career of teaching and traveling and stuff, that when I do come back, it's great for a short time, for a week, maybe 2 weeks. You know, by the time I've seen everybody, it's kind of like, okay, where's next? And that was the first time that I'd really felt that. So after being back for, like I said, a few weeks, the thought process was, okay, this is great, but what's next?
And was that more of a what's next travel-wise, or was that a more what's next teaching-wise and next steps in your career? Yeah,
I think there was both. It was definitely both. And this time there was already a plan in place of where to go. Mm-hmm. But it was also a thing of, as I was saying in the last episode, I think, was, although I don't mind, you know, being around people who aren't speaking English, I have no problem with that. That's been my life for over a decade. But there was a period after 8 months of being in Vietnam, and, you know, sometimes it does get a little bit lonely, where you just think, you know what, it would be really nice to just understand what's going on and to be understood without having to speak slowly and clearly all the time. It's just nice, you know, it's just easier. And there was a moment when I was back, I was with one of my friends and some of his friends. I didn't really know them, but we were having a nice evening. Everyone's talking. Of course, they're all from where I grew up. I understood everything in terms of, it was English, so I understood everything, but I couldn't connect to any of them. And I remember in that moment feeling more of an outsider then than I ever did when I was in Vietnam. And that realization, that took me back a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I bet, like you say, it hit you quite hard.
Yeah.
Because again, you would expect, like you say, you wasn't here that long, to still have, you know, that emotion and that feel like that connection. But but at the same time, like you say, it doesn't matter where you're from, what language you speak, you can connect with anybody. Yeah. Really, we're all the same.
Yeah, it isn't. Language isn't the only connector or the most important connector in that, and that's certainly what I realised then. So.
No, yeah. But no, again, quite early on in your career and realising that at that point, again, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I just think it made it easier. Somewhat, maybe that realisation did make it easier the next time I left, and the next time and the next time. Just knowing that, it made it easier for sure.
So as you said, you're getting the itch to go away.
Yeah.
What was the plan, or was there not any?
There was a little plan. When I was living in Vietnam, I had a few friends that were in Australia. So we were in regular contact, and one of my friends, she was talking about going to Barcelona after Australia. And because before then I hadn't actually put any thought into, okay, where am I going to go? What am I going to do next? But when she said Barcelona, I thought, yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Never been. And I thought, you know what, this time it'd be really nice to do something with somebody that you know. You know, it was going with a friend. It would have been a different experience in comparison to Vietnam, where I was there alone even though I made friends, but I was still, it's a big thing to do it alone. So I was like, yeah, why not? Let's go to Barcelona.
Oh, no. So again, somewhere a bit closer and with a friend, so a little bit different than Asia. Well, like you'd said, the reason you've gone is no one had gone before, and it was a bit random.
Yeah.
So you was going to Barcelona, obviously with a friend. You got to Barcelona. What was your actual plan? Where was you stopping? What was going on? What was your thoughts? Was you going travelling?
Well, not to the extent of Vietnam, because again I was much more focused this time in terms of getting a teaching job. Now, because I've got 1 year's experience under my belt, I know what to expect with the job, with teaching. So I was much more focused, like just go and get a job, try and find work. So before I went, I'd booked a hostel for 5 days. Because again, I do believe that you can over-plan and over-prepare.
Okay.
Like, why would I book a hostel for 2 weeks? Because the idea is when you go there, for me, in my mindset, it forces me to move on to the next step. Rather than being comfortable somewhere for 2 weeks, it forces me, okay, I'm in this hostel for 5 days, you've got to find accommodation. So it pushes me to do the next step, or at least that's my thought process. And the funny thing is, before going to Barcelona, obviously I booked a flight, booked the hostel, chatted with my friend, like, okay, we're ready to go, I'm ready because my money's dwindling, if I don't do it now, kind of a thing. My friend was being a little bit flaky, so I actually ended up going alone again. Yeah.
And how, was you okay with that? Did it?
Yeah, because once you go to somewhere like Vietnam alone, and I say I was there for a year, and you go through the hard times, the struggles that I mentioned, once you go through that, it just becomes a bit of a breeze. Going to Barcelona just felt like, yeah, that's easy, I can do that. So again, it would have been nice, a bit disappointing, it would have been nice to do, to go with a friend, but I was ready, I was prepared because of the experience I had in Vietnam.
No, yeah, so you already knew you could do it and it wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
Right, so you got to Barcelona, you've got the hostel for a couple of days.
Yeah.
Like you say, you didn't go travelling for 3 weeks.
No, I'm very focused.
What did you do? Obviously, because you're going to, like you say, did you stay in the hostel for a bit longer, or did you find a place to stay, or what?
I remember trying to extend for a little bit, because even though what I just said about being pushed into the next step and trying to find permanent accommodation, I had done no prep work whatsoever in trying to find accommodation. That's not going to surprise you. So on the night that I had to move out, I couldn't extend because they were fully booked. So then I was like, how do I find a flat? How do I find a room? What websites do I use? I had no idea. But luckily, being in a hostel, and I always think it's a great place, especially if you're younger, it's a great place to network. You'll always, somebody will always help. If you're in a hotel room completely alone, it's much more difficult, especially if you don't know what you're doing. It's just nice to talk with people, and people can help you out. Even local people with local websites, the websites that they use, like for example, Idealista, we don't use that in the UK. Spain, Portugal, Italy, it's a common website to find apartments or rooms in apartments or whatever. So I had some people, I was doing some research, trying to find a room. I'd found a few places, got a few phone numbers. The guys working at the hostel, they were really helpful, made a few phone calls for me, and I basically found one. I found a room. So the night that I had to leave the hostel, I moved into a room in a flat like that. It was really easy.
With very little preparation.
Somehow,
and a little helping hand from the locals again.
Exactly. I'll need a little helping hand.
Right. So, what was this accommodation like? Was did you say it was a room, a flat? What?
Room in a flat, in an apartment. Live-in landlord, and I think he had 2 or 3 rooms that he was renting out. I don't remember meeting any of the people that live there, but it's the worst accommodation I've ever stayed in. And I've stayed in hostels in Vietnam that cost like $4 a night.
Travel agent floors,
that kind of stuff. And I've got to say, this was the worst place I've ever stayed in. I don't think the guy had ever cleaned it. It was not nice, which shows that perhaps I should sometimes plan ahead.
So how did you get on with work? Did you start going to the local park, or a bit more traditional?
Not this time, but to be honest, I did approach it very similarly to Vietnam. Just like, I'll figure it out when I get there. I knew one of the best ways to do it was networking. As long as I was out, go out, try and meet some people, and I did, to be fair. But a lot of the people that I spoke to, a lot of the Brits or Americans or other Europeans that were living and working in Barcelona, they were working for tech companies, startup companies, telecommunications companies, which is not something that I wanted to do. Although there would have been an opportunity, you know, people say, oh, try this place and, you know, you'll easily get a job in that place. With me, I'm very much like plan A, you know, I'm very one-dimensional in that perspective. Just like, I wanted to find a teaching job. So nothing else was going to deter me, nothing was going to sway me. I was finding a teaching job and that was that. So I discovered this thing called Google, yeah. I was on Google just finding schools in Barcelona, finding websites, finding email addresses, a very simple approach, an approach that, you know, I used for years and it worked. And that's all I did, sent my CV over and waited for responses. But again, going back to planning being really important, I went to Barcelona end of June, beginning of July, which is summertime.
End of the school year.
Which means schools are closed. Which I should have realised, because I went to school, I went to college, I know this, but it just never registered because as I said, I'm just so one-dimensional. No, I'm going to Barcelona, I'm finding a teaching job. I didn't even think, I wonder if they're open, which I should have thought about. So, spoiler alert, I didn't get anything back.
Not even any interest, nothing that we'll get back to you soon, or?
There might have been one or two emails, something to the accord, you know, we'll get back to you after the summer. You know, maybe that was my first clue, like, I came too soon, kind of a thing. But as it turned out, you know, my Barcelona journey was short-lived anyway.
Well, what happened? Was it due to the finances, work, you're not finding work, or what?
No, I think my finances would have lasted until, you know, schools opened and whatnot. But just before I went to Barcelona, I visited my grandmother in hospital. My grandmother had a form of dementia. Now, although there was nothing serious at that time, you know, the reason for being in hospital, it was just a routine checkup. But 5 weeks into being in Barcelona, I got a phone call from my mother to say that my grandmother had passed away. It was a freak accident, and that was it. You know, the next day I was on the first flight back to the UK, back to Manchester.
Again, some devastating news. I know you say the day after you was on a flight, but for that, you know, that window from finding out to flying back.
Yeah.
Again, being isolated.
Mm-hmm.
How did that take? You know, how was you with that?
Again, it's tough. But the fact that I was so close was a huge help. Knowing that I would be back with family, with my mother, really soon, so it was much easier to manage. But again, it's just one of those things. Like, as you were saying, even later on in my career, where I started to plan, you know, better or do more research about places, there are some things you just can't plan for. You can't prepare for these sorts of things. And although there's this romantic idea of traveling, I'm going to go traveling and get these experiences, there's a lot of incredible things that come with that. However, there are also the negatives as well. You might find yourself in this situation one day, and it happened to me more than once. You know, you can't plan for this stuff. So yeah, unfortunately Barcelona came to an end, but I was able to get home really quickly and be with the family.
No, yeah, again, that's a good thing of being able to get home straight away with the family and deal with the grief.
Yeah.
With the loved ones that you've got. Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick word about Language for Life. They provide flexible online English courses to help you communicate confidently at work and in daily life. You can book an appointment by visiting languageforlifeonline.com. Let's get back into it. So obviously, as you say, Barcelona was short-lived. You're back in England, obviously. You had time to obviously agree with family and obviously deal with funerals, etc.
Yeah.
What was the next step for yourself? What was your plans or lack of plans? Yeah. Obviously, you know, I took a few weeks and spent time with family. But, you know, it just kind of proves whatever this itch, whatever this urge was, it's been a constant. And within a couple of weeks, it was back again. It wasn't a case of like, you know, maybe I should stay here now. You know, this could happen again. You know, maybe it's best to stay here. Whatever it was, whatever that urge was within me was still there. And
and I had to listen to it. And again, I had the support of my family. You know, they understood it, which was important. Whereas this time I didn't have a place in mind. So what I had was basically the whole world to tackle. I was like, well, I don't have any preference, so I can go anywhere, which was very freeing. And quite exciting as well. So I found proper websites this time, you know, TEFL job boards, teaching English as a foreign language, job boards, that kind of stuff. And I sent my CV everywhere, all over Europe. It wasn't Asia this time because I thought I'd done Asia, let's, you know, try somewhere else. So all over Europe, even the Middle East. As I said, you know, because I'd cast my net further, there were so many more opportunities. And I started to do a few interviews.
When was this roughly in the year?
So now this school's had started, if that's what you mean. So this was, I'd say around the end of September 2013. And again, a really important thing to know is it's never a bad time to apply. Maybe the middle of summer is a bad time in certain countries because the schools will completely shut down, nobody's in the office. That's not to say you should never apply in the summer. But around sort of September time, even though you think, oh, don't apply because they've already got all the teachers they need, teachers drop out. Teachers, you know, a school might have its full team, and then, you know, the day after, a teacher might not turn up. A teacher might quit.
Yeah.
That teacher might not be the right fit for the school, and the school lets that teacher go. So there is always an opportunity. And I think that's what it was for me. Schools that needed a teacher for that very reason, whether they hadn't hired enough, or they'd got extra work, or a teacher didn't work out, so they needed somebody. And it's actually a great position to be in, because it gives you a position of power, because the schools are a little bit more desperate. So you've got a little bit more power this time. Yeah. And it certainly felt like that way for me. And I think I had about 3. Well, there was a lot of interest, but I think I had 3 interviews. So there was interest from Kuwait, from a school in Kuwait, a school in Bahrain. That part of the world, the money's very good, very attractive, of course, especially for a young person or people starting out. And I had a couple of job interviews in Turkey, 2 job interviews in particular, and one of them, I really liked it. The person that I'd spoken to, the school sounded great. It was a different, a part of Turkey that I didn't really know that well. So I just thought, hey, Turkey, you know, that sounds really attractive. So I was this close to accepting a job in Turkey.
What made you not accept that then, if it sounded very attractive?
I was still looking, you know, because I felt like I'd found, okay, this is how you apply for jobs. This is, you know, I found my way. I've navigated my way a little bit better. I know now how to apply.
It's called planning.
Yeah, I learned the hard way. And I learned this after a few years, but you're absolutely right. But just before I did, I was still searching, and there was a job post for a job in Italy.
Okay.
And as soon as I saw that, I'd never been to Italy, but everyone knows Italy. Everyone knows about Italian culture, history, food, fashion, all of those things. You know, when you think about Italy, there's a romantic idea about Italy. It seems like a very glamorous place to be, and it is. You know.
Well, you're talking about it with quite a bit of passion.
Yes. So, like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, I want this job. It's Italy, and I want to go to Italy. So again, I applied, and I think they responded within a few hours, actually. And again, for that reason, they were desperate. They needed somebody. So the other school in Turkey was emailing me saying, "Oh, Kane, you know, have you made a decision? We really need to know." And I was just holding them back a little bit because I was waiting to find out about the job in Italy. And they sent me an email asking for an interview. So I was like, I've got to try. Before I commit to anything else, I've got to try, at least do the interview. Because as well, when I read the job description, you know, reading all of the job specifications, the requirements. One of the main requirements was must have a full driving license, which I didn't have. But I think this is another really important thing for teachers, not just for teachers, but anybody who's applying for a job. Don't be put off by the one thing that you don't have on, on a job description. Because let's say there's a list of 20 requirements, you meet 19 out of the 20. Don't be put off by the one that you don't have. Because you never know, maybe it's an old job description. Maybe they've changed the rules but haven't updated it or whatever. And that turned out to be the case. Because I did the interview and I found out that was a requirement the previous year, but they'd just forgotten to update it. So imagine if I hadn't applied for that one thing. But I've got to say, it was the hardest interview of my life. It was ruthless.
Today or?
Yeah.
Oh, right. So again, early on in your career
Very early on. And I'd studied civil engineering before getting into teaching. And I'd done all kinds of jobs for construction companies when I was 17, 18. One of them was, at 17 years old, I had a job interview with 3 people firing questions at me. That was stressful, but nothing in comparison to this interview.
Why, what went on?
So, a lot of the questions that were asked are actually illegal.
Okay.
It's that kind of stuff, right? Because it's the questions that you're not allowed to ask.
Is
right?
that not just the UK, or is that across the board, or?
It's just some countries have a little bit more of a relaxed policy about these things, and I was young. It didn't bother me, but they were just firing all of these questions at me, and I later understood why those questions were being asked. And another thing that I didn't realise at the time, so the woman that was interviewing me, her business partner, was off camera. Okay. So while she was asking the questions, he was watching my reactions. So, and again, that's another thing that I've learned through online interviews. When you're doing an interview, somebody else is probably watching. Because while one person is focused on the questions, the other person is focused on your reactions. But I think not knowing that, I think if I'd known that, I might have been much more nervous or whatever. But because I didn't know that, my reactions was completely natural. Therefore, but basically, they offered me the job there and then. So my answers were fine and my reactions must have been fine because I was offered a job there and then.
Especially on the call.
Yeah. So again, within almost accepting a job in Turkey, within 24 hours, all of a sudden this new opportunity came out that I was really excited about. And they offered me the job. And I remember inside, I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to Italy. But outside, I was I'm going to have to let you know. But I'd already decided I was going to Italy.
The fact that you've gone from going to Vietnam, going to Barcelona with, again, lack of a plan. And now, obviously, you're still in the UK and actually at least get in a position somewhere first and know you're going to a role, so that you've got some security as such.
Yeah, a very different situation again.
No, I know you mentioned a second ago you will, obviously you found out later why it was such a bombarding interview. Obviously, we'll not discuss that now because I know we've got a future episode to talk about Italy.
Absolutely.
It might be a few. There's quite a lot gone on.
Stay tuned for that one.
So we'll go into that in more detail. Now, obviously, your Barcelona time, obviously it didn't further your career in teaching, but how would you reflect upon it? What did you learn?
Yeah, like you say, it was 5 weeks. But I still learned a lot and I still grew as a person because of it. As I said, my grandmother passing away, that's not something you can really plan for. But going through things like that and getting out of it the other side, it can only make you stronger. As much of a cliche that it is, it made me stronger. It made me much more resilient. So again, even though, like you say, I didn't improve as a teacher, I certainly grew as a person, knowing that what I'd been through in Vietnam as well, the struggles, having the struggles of Barcelona, or even just, like I said, I didn't find the best apartment, the best flat ever, but I did it in a very short period of time. So it only reinforced the idea that I can do this, you know, and I can do these things, you know, I can do more than I think. And it's not just me, I think anybody as well, you know, people can do more than they think. You just have to put yourself in that situation. Planning is great. It's, you know, people should plan. I'm an advocate of that. But there's nothing wrong with just diving in head first. You know, what's the worst that can happen? So.
No, yeah, you're right. What is the worst that could happen? Mm-hmm. But I do think planning is definitely a better option, or at least loosely planning for positions or accommodation at some sort. Absolutely. For a little bit longer term. But
and I do promise my planning skills improved later in my career.
But at the same time, if you had gone and planned everything and everything was all hunky-dory, you wouldn't have learnt these lessons.
And to be honest, you know, even if I'd found a job and I'd found the right apartment, my grandmother still would have passed away, and I still would have flown back. So, you know, hindsight's it's a funny thing, but absolutely no regrets whatsoever. And that next step in life was incredibly exciting.
Well, like I say, we'll discuss that further.
Yep.
But at least we know where you're going, and you've actually got a position, and you will be teaching in that country. So yeah, stay tuned. Next time on Teacher Talk, Kane lands in Italy and joins a small school with big ambitions. This is the moment Kane's career really begins to grow.